Hi, everybody. I'm Scott. I run a studio here downtown called Open, and we do all the usual kinds of stuff like magazine covers and logos and some motion graphics and some stuff for television and some illustration work. This is a piece for the New York Times. Basically, this is, I think, the smallest thing you'll see tonight, which it's actually about this big in real life. For those of you listening on the podcast, that's 2 inches. This was a piece about consumerism. And it's basically the map of the mall that you see when you go to the mall. So we have anchor stores, crushing banality and endless despair, lots of little boutiques in the middle, and of course, always in the center is the food court. But the idea of putting this in here is because, a lot of designers in New York do these pieces for the Times or other publications, and they pay you like $50 and you have no time to do it, and you wish you were doing something else, but then 2 million people see it, or used to see it when people bought newspapers. But now it's online, so maybe more see it. But my point is that whenever we get to do one of these, to me it's a chance to kind of just do something extra and not just make a little drawing, but write something or make a joke or whatever, which kind of goes with the title of the talk, which is Try a Little Harder. And I think that, when I look at stuff that people make or that have been made by people, which most stuff is, if it doesn't look like the person cared about it, I think well, why should I care about it? And so the stuff I like to make is the things that nobody will ever notice, and hopefully somebody will kind of see it and feel rewarded that they actually spent the time to bother to look at it. Another project we've actually been working on for several years now, almost a decade, and it's still going, is a television show that is on PBS called Art 21, or Art in the 21st Century. And when it started, was the only national public television program entirely dedicated to contemporary American art and artists. There are some other shows now, but at the time they were the only one really doing that. And it was our job to come up with a visual identity for the show and also do the animation and so on that packages the show, which you'll see some of in a second. And the problem for us was, if you're going to do a show about art, what does it look like? And anything, this is some page of sketches from early on, and any kind of visual image to depict the idea of art is kind of the worst cliche possible in the world. And then anything you would make also, regardless of whether it's cliche or not, kind of competes with the actual art that's being shown in the show. So you want to do a thing about art, but you don't want to make too much art at the same time. So basically it was our job to try to figure out, what's a way that we could do something that was both really abstract and kind of simple, but also full of meaning. Because this has such a wide audience that, some of the artists on the show, we here may have heard of them, but some people watching the show don't even get, what it is that they do and have to be introduced to this stuff. So we went through all these different directions of, what could we do that was very simple but had some meaning to it. And the thing you see on the top was kind of the beginning of the idea that happened, which is we combined 3 elements together: typography, line, and color. And the typography would just simply talk about art. It would say the different things that art is or could be. Basically, adjectives. And the great thing is that pretty much any adjective you could think of, some art is. So you could say it's beautiful, you could say it's stupid, you could say it's ridiculous, you could say it's expensive, you could say it's inspiring. Art is all those things. And so that you could make meaning with, of course, typography without upstaging the art. But then at the same time, you needed to do something visual, we thought. So we created this idea of a line drawing through space that, again, is very abstract, but it's connected to kind of the history of mark making and of art and so on. And then, of course, color, because we thought it had to be very, very bright and vibrant. So first thing we did was, okay, now what typeface does art look like? And actually, I went to school with a type designer named Tobias Frere-Jones, who I'm sure a lot of you know his work. And I literally called him up and said, we're doing this show about art. Do you have anything that we could use? Are you working on something? And we kind of talked about it, and I said, it should be sort of about the idea of seeing. And he said, yeah, I've been doing a sketch, or I had been doing a sketch several years before for this typeface that would be used in newspapers. For very small type in newspapers, like the classified ads you see that these posters were based on. And he showed it to me, and he was calling it Retina at the time, but it was just this sketch that was in his desk that he hadn't pulled out in years. And I said, well, basically the same issues involved in printing something really small on crappy paper, they're pretty much the same as the issues you have putting something on television, because it's very low res and it has to move around and all that stuff. So let's try it. So he gave me this to work with, and what was really nice about this, I felt, is that every choice visually that had been made in the typeface was totally made based on how legible it would make the type. So the E's have that slanted bar just because it makes it more distinctive, and a horizontal one might make it look like another letter. And of course they have these crazy light wells cut into them that the ink would fill in when it was printed and all that, and it's very wide so that, again, to maximize legibility and all that. And so what I loved about it is that it was a typeface that wasn't based on taste. It was based on something you could see. And that made perfect sense as far as for the show. So we used that typeface, and then we did a million drawings of the line. This is, I think, one of the more beautiful ones done by Susan Barber, who was a designer in the studio. We thought about, a line creates space as you follow it, and then you could frame it in different ways. And of course, there's the idea of color, which was a whole other thing that we went through. Now, the thing is, so the elements of the package are literally just those: words, a line, and color. And we added a kind of other set of constraints on it, which is we knew at the beginning that the show was going to be on for 4 seasons. That was the idea. Of course, now they've gone to 5, and they're going to do 6, but at the time, there were 4. And so we created a plan, a 4-season plan, which would actually take 8 years to execute, of what each year of the graphics would look like. And amazingly, the clients were okay with that. And, I mean, we had a lot of details to work out. But we basically did this plan that would be kind of mirroring the development of filmmaking in a way. So the first thing I'm going to show you is Season 1. It's very flat. Season 2, we added 3D. Season 3, we added focus and depth of field. And Season 4, we added the idea of editing. It has cuts and fades and things in it in different camera angles. So Season 1.
I like to see people's hand in the world.
If it doesn't have ambiguity, don't bother.
So Season 2 is still this.
I was in search of an image that could best articulate Americanism.
It's at the basis of existence.
And then Season 3, we added lighting. Oops. So you'll see there are actual cuts and dissolves, as if you have different cameras shooting the thing at the same time. Before that, we had planned for 4 seasons, and so of course all the words are all set. And part of our job, also over several years, was we had this kind of continuity process where we had to make sure we weren't repeating words, because I didn't want to repeat a word ever. So if we used it, they would say, what about, urban or whatever, I'd say, not Season 2. So far we haven't repeated. Signage environmental design projects, the first of which is up at Yale University in New Haven. And this photo actually shows the building after it was fixed, but before they put the art back in. And actually I loved it without the art in it. It's really beautiful. It's like a bachelor pad, with like, in Yale it's like Hogwarts is outside the window, But anyway, our job was to do the signage program. The student recommended us. We pitched some ideas. We had never done signage before. I had no idea what we were doing. And we actually got the job. And we made a whole signage system. I won't go through every part of it, but there are some details that I think are really interesting, and as I said before, probably no one has ever noticed. I mentioned that Kahn, the architect, was really interested in beautiful, real materials. And we didn't know at the time, having never done any signage design, that most signage is not made that way. In fact, if you look at, even in the fanciest building, you look at sort of the sign that says what room you're going into. It's usually made of plastic. It's often stuck to the wall, literally with like a butterfly of double stick tape on the back. And like you would put a postcard on a dorm room wall or something. And we thought, Khan is not going to stand for this. He's going to roll over in his grave. We have to do something real. And so the biggest part of the job, actually, or the most signs we made are these, which are the Americans for Disability Act required room identification signs. They have numbers that nobody uses. They have Braille that no one needs because no blind people are just wandering around a museum alone looking for the bathroom. However, of course, it's well-meaning and it's something you have to do. So we thought, let's take this everyday simple object that's usually something nobody notices and transform it into something we think that's more beautiful. So this is a concrete wall that's part of the original building. And we had two rules that were given to us. One is you couldn't attach anything to the wall that couldn't be reversed. The other rule was to do things that, for us, that respected materials the way that Khan did. So these signs screw into the grout or mortar between the bricks. And so if you want to take it out, you can take it back out and then just patch that. It doesn't ruin the wall. And in other words, it doesn't touch the wall here. But these pieces are, rather than being plastic, are made out of a solid zinc plate. They're etched the way you would etch an etching plate. The numbers are raised, as is the Braille. It's all one piece of metal. And the numbers are then polished, and the Braille doesn't need to be. And then it's screwed literally through two holes right into the wall. So exactly, it is the thing you're looking at. We had many fights with vendors, again. A lot of the signage people would send us this stuff that was like really fancy and glossy, and we'd say, no, we just want to etch it, it's just the metal. And they would say, oh yeah, you want to do something artsy. Oh yeah, cool, okay. And then they would send us stuff that's like ground metal, you know, with those, like, it looks like an old coffee shop or something, and then they would put fake screw heads glued on the front. Like now it looks like it's screwed into the wall. And it's like, well, can't we just screw it into the wall? So it was, for us, it had to be real. So in the end it was. And at that time, while we were working on this project, this movie came out called My Architect, which is about Louis Kahn. And it was made by his son, Nathaniel Kahn. It's a really great film and a really great portrait of kind of a person who was really brilliant and kind of crazy at the same time. And of course, a part of Kahn's biography, or part of his heritage, is that he was Jewish. And it's brought up in the movie, and it's really part of his character and who he was. And what was interesting is that when we were doing these signs, you know, you had to screw these things into the wall, and they said at a certain point, they said, oh, they can't be regular screws because people will steal it. And, you know, they'll just unscrew it and leave with the sign. You know? And so they have to be these security screws that nobody has a screwdriver that fits into. And so we got this catalog, and they said, you just have to pick one. And so we're looking at the screws, and we see one of them, instead of being a normal screwdriver thing, it's a tiny 6-pointed star. So we thought, well, let's put that one in there for Kahn, you know, based on who he was and what he was into. And no one will ever notice, but if anybody does, then why not? It's a reason to pick it. So it's hard to see here, but it's like a little Star of David in the screws. Again, part of the job was, part of the rules of the job was that we not ruin the building, we not attach anything to the walls. And so there are these walls that are right opposite the elevator bank, like right when you come out on each floor. It's this big concrete wall. You have no idea where you are, so you really need a directional sign. But we couldn't put anything on that wall, or anything that was substantial anyway. We certainly couldn't paint it. So we came up with this idea to just use theatrical slides. They're called gobos. They just project the sign in light. And it took quite a while to figure it out because they have to be off to the side, so the type actually is stretched in this crazy way because it's projected at an angle so that it looks straight when you see it. But it's very cheap in the end. When they want to change it, they don't have to repaint the wall. If they have a new show, they just make a new slide, and it's like a couple $100 and they're done. There are also projections in the lobby that are fancier. This is a current events thing that's fed by an RSS feed of sort of what's going on in the museum. And we did other more typical stuff like a brochure rack. This, again, hangs from a bar at the top of the wall. None of this is touching the wall. It might rest on it, but it's not attached. This is a donor wall. This is pictograms we made. Of course, New Haven's famous for pizza, so the no eating thing is no slices. And here they are in action. We tried really hard. We really wanted to deconstruct the idea of like the men's icon and the women's icon because of all the issues involved in that. And for a long time we were pushing to, because really the only thing that differentiates them within this language is that one's wearing pants and one's wearing a skirt. Like that's the identifier. And so for a long time we really wanted to just have a pair of pants and a skirt. But they wouldn't allow it. This is one of my favorite signs. It's just a beautiful Gotham number stuck in a stairwell. I think the most interesting part of the job, though, was the outside front entrance sign of the building. And this was the original sign that was designed by Kahn's office when the building was built. And it has a stone-carved section and then these wooden panels that would be hand-painted like by a sign painter, and they would change based on what show was going on in the museum at that time. And by the time we were brought on, this thing looked really sad. And the panels underneath were long gone. And this thing had been repainted, and it looked really crappy and everything. It was all in disrepair. So part of our job was to make a new sign. And we tried to be faithful to the original design, but again, do something that looked like it wasn't trying to mimic the original thing, but was respectful to the original thing. So we redesigned the stone panel to be, we were using Gotham typeface for everything, so that's in Gotham. And then these panels would be replaced by LED panels, so they could program it and it would say lecture today or whatever. So two things changed from this design. One is the fact that we wanted that to be blue. Of course, Yale's color is blue, so we thought that would be cool. And for some technical reason that I still don't understand to this day, it couldn't be blue. So they said, yeah, here are the other options. What should it be? And I wanted to be really generic, so I said red, and of course they got mad because red is Harvard's color. And in the end, it ended up being kind of amber. But the other thing that changed was the actual Gotham type, because we knew that we wanted to have this sign hand-carved. We didn't want to sandblast it or silkscreen it or do anything with machines. We wanted it to be a hand-carved sign. So as far as I'm concerned, there's only one place in the world really to go for that, which is a business in Newport, Rhode Island called the John Stevens Shop. And they have been under the same continuous... it's been one continuous business, let's say, for over 300 years. In fact, as far as I know, they're the oldest privately owned business in America. But they've been there this whole time. Of course, it's different people now. But anyway, it's run right now by a family called the Benson family. And we went there and said, basically, we want you guys to carve this sign. And the first thing they said was, we don't carve typefaces. We do lettering, and then we carve lettering. And so what we could do is we could make a lettering, a kind of hand-drawn lettering, that was based on Gotham. And I mentioned Tobias Farrar-Jones before. Of course, he designed Gotham. And I called him up and I said, are you okay with this? And he said, yeah, are you kidding? I want to see what they do. That sounds really cool. And so I made some initial sketches of sort of like, what is the difference between Gotham over there and kind of a traditional Roman, monumental letter? You end up with this weird kind of optima in the middle, which is basically what they did. They redrew Gotham on the top and made it into this, which is hard to see there. That gives you a better view of it. So it has kind of the bones of Gotham, but the taste of a traditional hand-drawn Roman letter. And then so we updated this with their lettering, and then Nick Benson at the John Stevens Shop carved it. And of course, it's all done entirely by hand. It's really insane. It's really beautiful. And if you've ever seen this done, or even if you've never seen it done, you should try to go, because basically what they do traditionally is they design the letters, they then kind of plan out the stone, and they draw the letters right on the stone with a brush. And then they carve right through what they've drawn on the stone. So it becomes this amazing thing. Don't misspell anything. So here's what the sign looks like in the end. And my goal for the sign was that once it was made, you wouldn't really be able to tell when it was made. I wanted this thing to feel very classic and this to feel very generic, and I think we achieved it. Because if you go there now, I think it's very elegant, but you can't tell, was this done with the building? Was this done in like the early 60s? Is it brand new? Who knows? But it's still there. They don't put as much cool stuff on here as I'd like them to, but it looks good. There was one more part that we proposed to the project, which is basically the Yale Art Gallery at that time had been doing some outreach efforts with New Haven. And New Haven, the city, and Yale, the university, have an interesting relationship, which is basically Yale is kind of a walled city inside this city that is not economically that successful these days. And let's just say there's some tension. And so, sometimes. And so Yale was trying to reach out more to the community. And we said, well, we could do a sign that does that. That would be cool. We basically want to have a big sign that tells people, come to the art gallery, because the Yale Art Gallery is free and open to all at all times. So we proposed a 100-foot tall neon sign over the building. So here's the other sign I just showed you. And then we proposed this 100-foot tall neon sign that basically would be above the building. And we spent about a year on this. We went all around New Haven to different vantage points. How far away could you see it? Could you see it from the bad neighborhood? You know, what were the sight lines and everything? And did it look cool when it was reversed, you know, and all this stuff. And we worked quite hard at this, and we built it into a kind of overall signage system that included all these other elements and everything. And it's funny, the directors of the gallery loved it. They couldn't get the funding for it, so it didn't happen. But the one story I remember that was really amazing is that I teach at Yale, and one of the other teachers there is this guy named John Gamble, who teaches typography, and he's a fairly traditional guy. His job besides teaching is he has a post called the University Printer, which is basically he's in charge of graphic design at Yale. And I had brought him onto the project the way like a presidential candidate brings on a running mate. Basically, we're going to propose all these crazy ideas, but this guy is here and he's normal, so you can trust us. And so he would come to the meetings and stuff and whatever, and he helped out with the project. And I was really nervous to show him this thing, because it's like, I mean, you're not supposed to stack letters, right? And also it's like this crazy thing stuck on the building. And so I said, John, I have to show you this idea, and I have to make sure you're okay with it. What do you think, or whatever? And I showed it to him, and he pauses for a second and just goes, you need a little more space between the A and the R. And that was it. It didn't happen, but I think my favorite part was that he actually was okay with it. This is a project client that we've worked with for several years called Good Magazine. And they were started in LA by a bunch of young people who basically wanted to and still want to change the world. And I think they kind of are changing the world. Good is basically, they call it the magazine for people who give a damn. And I call it a lifestyle magazine for, again, people who want to change the world. So we got a call from them to do the design of the magazine. They had a logo already, which they're kind of holding up there. And they asked us to design the magazine, and this was the first time we had done an entire magazine from scratch. So we started really basically, and I was looking at things like newspapers for inspiration, because I felt like if this was going to be a magazine that was about being responsible and aware of the world, that it should be a thing that had a lot of different things going on at the same time, that you should be able to look at something and then see something else out of the corner of your eye, and if you spend more time with it, again, you'll be rewarded by more things. Back to, you know, what I talked about before, the deeper you look, kind of the more you get out of it. So we started, you know, with the typical like sample spreads and random dummy stuff and whatever, and you can see a lot of little elements that feel like a newspaper, like it almost feels like a clipping that was pasted on the page. And we intentionally picked a kind of family of typefaces that, again, wasn't really trendy but wasn't really classic. It's almost like a very eclectic thing that it looks as fresh now as it did then, or as unfresh now as it did then. And used it to create all these little details. Again, we're very into all these tiny little details, just like with the Folkways project. You see a little bit of that influence here, I think. When we were given the project, they already had this system on their website of kind of meta tags for content, and there were these dots. And they wanted to bring it into the magazine, so we kind of transformed them into these little symbols. But again, the symbols are for all the categories of content, but they're not what you'd expect. So if you look a little closer, politics is a hurricane, and health is a martini and like a highball glass or whatever. Living is this weird piece of clip art that we found somewhere. And every issue uses those symbols and also creates a theme for the content. And we created a kind of graphic theme or a system where each issue had its own color and its own logo and so forth. So issue 1 was called I Heart America, and it had this little logo in a purple color, like red, white, and blue put together. And I'll go very quickly through these. There were things in there about patriotism and about campaign financing. This was a piece called Political NASCAR, where we made these logo suits for candidates like Hillary Clinton to show where they got their money from. This is the media issue. Its logo was a little screen and a print put together. In there were different things like the best magazines ever, and of course the perforated trading cards for media moguls like Martha Stewart and Silvio Berlusconi. This was an issue called Plan B, which was all about doing things differently. So this is a piece about real estate developers that are speculatively buying up property based on future climate change, which is true, like beachfront property 10 miles inland, really evil. This is a travel guide to North Korea. There's Lil Kim. A thing about greenwashing, with every slogan ever turned into green. Just green it. We bring green things to life, and so on. So every theme, as I said, every issue had a different theme. This one was about citizenship and had a board game in it about running for president. So you could pick your candidate and go through the board game and roll the dice and raise money that way. And then, of course, different things would happen to you like this. It's revealed someone is in your family is gay. Of course, Democrats ahead 1 space. Republicans back 2 spaces. And then at the end, you would win by this combination of, you had to win 2 out of 3 contests. You had to have the most money, or win an arm wrestling match, or win rock, paper, scissors to win. I mentioned that the themes kind of showed up on the spine of the magazine, and another thing that we added was this idea of these quotes. And there's a story, I have told it many times, about a mistake I made on typesetting one of these, personally. And so this is issue 5 that I just showed you, and every issue has a quote on it, and you see that they're all in italic, and then the names are in Roman, except for that one, where you see Abraham Lincoln's name is also in italic. Issue 6 had the theme of design. So we asked, or I asked the editors, I said, well, I made this mistake on the last issue. Could we run a correction the next issue, like to correct that? And they said, I guess so. So on the letters page of the design issue, it said, oops, on the spine, Abraham Lincoln's name was typeset incorrectly. It should have been in Roman, not italics. So the design issue was all about the idea of what is good design and what's not good design. So the cover features an AK-47 because there was an essay inside really examining the idea of what is good design. So the AK-47 assault rifle is sleek and well-made and very popular and very efficient and all of that, but it only exists to kill people very efficiently. So is that good or bad design? Of course, the other effect is that it ended up in the wrong part of the newsstand all the time. This is not staged. No one believes this photo, but it's real. And I mentioned every issue had a logo. So for the design issue, we thought it would be funny to just have the logo be a black dot. But we realized later that actually the Museum of Modern Art had done this already back in the 50s. Their good design shows had this black dot as their logo. And inside the issue, again, we dealt with all these questions of, again, what is good design? And this essay by Alice Twemlow is really about doing very small things, like I've been talking about, that might make people's life better if they just notice or think about it or enjoy them. One fun thing we did is that we had guest typefaces in the issue. So you see on the right there, typefaces that would not be normally in good. So we used Futura Stencil. Yes. Thank you. Sorry. And Arnold Backlund, of course, Handel Gothic, all these like kind of misfit toys of the type world. And we used them in a kind of starring role in the section. This kind of Frankfurter here. We have Matrix. And then we, of course, ran bios for all of them as sort of guest contributors. The last thing I'll show you in good is some infographics we made. There was a section in the magazine, or still is, called Transparency. And good has kind of started a renaissance, or helped along a renaissance of information graphics. And we got to do them ourselves in this design issue. In the issue, there were things like this map or chart of all the female world leaders. This is their face blown up. Each square indicates 1 million people that they govern. This is a piece showing the number of years that people who were later found to be innocent have spent on death row in America. At that time, it was 1,125 years. This was a piece about public toilets. And I don't mean like Starbucks or Barnes & Noble. I mean like these kind of European, you pay for it, it washes itself, that most of the world has, or most of the cities do. But in New York, I think we have one, right? Like in Madison Square Park or something, but it's always broken. So at this time, though, that one wasn't even operational. So the toilet we showed was the lamppost outside our studio on Barrack Street. And the idea of the graph is that if you take all the people in a city and divide it by all the toilets, you get the number of people you have to wait in line behind to use the toilet. So in New York, you have to wait in an infinite line because there are 0 toilets. And in Los Angeles, 500,000 people, Boston, 90,000, and so on. So we made this graph where each person shown there, represents 1,000 people, and they are in line. And then, so you see the New York line is this blue line that goes off the page forever. And then here's the LA line, and so on. And this was a situation where one of the designers in the studio who was making this page was driving me crazy because he didn't want to repeat any photos. Like, he wanted to do custom ones for every single one. We finally compromised, and I think they'd only repeat a couple times. The page on the right here is about different walls built around the world. So we drew them, of course, in scale and all that. But then the length of them, which of course doesn't fit on the page, was represented by common food items of that culture. So the Berlin Wall was 900,000 bratwursts long. The Gaza Strip and West Bank barriers are almost 20 million falafel long, enjoyed on both sides of the barrier. And the U.S.-Mexico border fence is over 7 million tacos long, or will be. Also enjoyed on both sides of the fence. The last thing in this section was a page about the crisis in Darfur, and they asked us to kind of do an infographic about it, and instead what we made was a comic book, which is basically talking about the situation there in kind of everyday language that you might explain it to a friend using, and put into the mouths of kind of normal people that you might know. So guys playing video games or people at a barbecue or whatever. And if you read it, you actually get an understanding of what's going on over there. But you see it through the mouths of these people that are so far detached from what's actually happening. So at the end, you understand a little bit about what's going on, but then you're left with this impression of, like, these guys sitting there not talking about it anymore and drinking wine or whatever at lunch. So you also get this sense of being distanced from it. So this first one is about a poll of Americans and their opinions about other countries. So this is 20 countries picked basically at random, and these are stacks of postcards that indicate the positive opinions of those countries. In other words, you sent home postcards from those places. So we were really surprised by some of them. Like, a lot of people, more people like North Korea than we thought, or Iran or whatever. But we had a lot of fun making the postcards. Come to Iran, it's radical. And let my people go to Egypt. We also got to use many typefaces that we never normally use. And then it's funny, when we were laying this thing out, they were all just gray boxes with the names of the countries in them. And then when we were doing the final postcards, I said, okay, this one of them, you just have to leave the way it is. And we left it there. It's official postcard of the glorious People's Republic of North Korea in gray. Another one we did was talking about some companies, the 10 biggest companies in the world based on their market value, and how they compare in terms of their sales to countries. So if you look at the size of the flags here, the flags are based on the market capitalization value of that company. So Exxon is the biggest company in the world. They're worth $315 billion right now. And then the rest of the list goes down from there. Apple is on there now, and Google, and so on. And you can see, there you go, Exxon's the biggest. And then we have smaller ones like Apple and so on. And then we did another thing, which is the height of the flags on the poles is their sales in 2009. So, for instance, Google sales were $23 billion, but then the gross domestic product of the nation of Cyprus is less than that. So you can actually see it's kind of amazing that, you know, these companies you've never maybe heard of, like PetroChina, has a bigger economy than some fairly large countries. So it was kind of fun to do. Again, these kind of details, we spent so much time on that, it still looks really confusing, but it was fun to make. And then the last one I'll show you is this piece about happiness. It's called mean happiness, because it's average happiness. And this was a poll that's been done for many years by an institute in Holland. They have a thing called the World Database of Happiness. How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 4? And they track it. And so we made these graphs where this is the line of how happy people are. It's over a certain amount of time. So you can see Australia is like pretty steady. They're actually pretty happy. They look kind of bored with it though. They're not very excited. Mexico is freaking out a little bit. You can see things are going up and down, and there's lots of like drug killings and unrest. So they're a little not so happy. And then France was doing okay until 2006 when the U.S. House of Representatives changed freedom fries back to French fries, which of course was not the reason for their happiness dropping, but we'd like to say that it was. And then I'm going to show you one last thing, which is actually kind of a big project. Here in New York, for Brooklyn Bridge Park. The Brooklyn waterfront, it starts basically at the Brooklyn Bridge, and it goes all the way down pretty much to Red Hook. And it was this entire area of warehouses and shipping places and factories and so on that most of them had gone out of business, and the area was pretty derelict. And an idea was brought forth years ago to turn this into a beautiful park. And we got a call a few years ago about this project because what they wanted to do was put a big vinyl banner on one of these buildings that said basically, "Park coming soon, brought to you by the mayor and the governor," or whatever. And you could see that, I guess, from the water or whatever. And, I mean, everybody knows what these things look like. They put up this banner, and then, like, after 4 years, it's still there, "Coming soon," and it's all water damaged and horrible. And so we said, okay, but we're not going to do a banner. Like, you want people to know about the project. The problem is the project was very controversial for a long time because it's funded by some development of condos and a hotel that's going to be next to the park. And the problem is without that development, there would be no park at all, and there would be only condos. So they were trying to make this thing work, and they wanted to kind of explain the park, and we thought that just a vinyl sign wouldn't do it. So we actually came up with an idea for a website called thisisyourpark.org that would basically explain what I just explained. It's going to be a cool park, it's funded in this way, but it's free for you, and isn't that great? And we would explain the project. So they went for it, and the site's no longer up because we've moved on to the next phase. But they still wanted a sign on the building saying that something's going to happen. So instead of a big vinyl banner, we hired these guys, who are amazing. That's Gerard there on the left. As far as I know, these guys are one of the only companies left in New York doing this traditional billboard painting. There's down on 7th Avenue in the Village, there's always a Barney's billboard there that's kind of hand-painted. They do that, among other things. And so we gave them the type, and we said, put it on the building. And it was amazing watching them work. It was really cool. And then this was being done over Memorial Day weekend a few years ago because they had a press event on the Tuesday after the weekend that they wanted to have in front of it. And Rob, one of the designers in my studio, lives right near here, so he would ride his bike down there and watch them and supervise and whatever. And then when they were finishing up, he gives me a call. He says, Scott, you got to get down here. This is totally messed up. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. And so I get down there, and this is what I see. So you just notice the G? There's something weird going on down there, which is that this lowercase g, that is supposed to go up above the x height. They basically moved it, and I guess they thought that this should align or something. instead of the, anyway, that's what they did. And so, and Rob, my designer, was just freaked, what are we going to do? And the thing is, we had this idea that this would be painted directly on the surface of the original building. So, in other words, we didn't want to like prime this or paint it or make it look pretty. We wanted this to be like an intervention on the reality of what was there. So, not only was this, the G, wrong, but it was over this cool no smoking sign that was still there. And so, because the sign painter said, yeah, no problem, we'll just paint this all silver and we'll fix it, don't worry about it. But I didn't want to lose this because this looked really cool. And it shows the relationship of the typography to the building. So then what are we going to do? We want, the G is messed up, the thing, we want to paint it, whatever. And then we realized, let's just redesign the G. So we did it on site. And we redrew the G and said, and gave them a new drawing, and they scaled it up and they did it, and it looks great. And there it is. This is at the ribbon cutting with Pataki and Bloomberg and Marty Markowitz in front of it. And you can see a little bit of the silver paint here where they fixed it up. But again, who would ever know, normal people outside of this room, that that is not the G in Bureau Grotesque 3.7 made into a stencil by us. So then, of course, after that was changed, we had to go back and mess up the G everywhere else. Because we couldn't keep that G if the sign looked like this. So then we brought it back into Illustrator and we changed the G that we were using. So it was always consistent. So then we had to change the website with the bad G on the website and everything. So that lasted for a few years. And then at a certain point there was a transition from this teaser type phase to the real building of the park phase, which is what's going on now. So we created an identity for the park with its own symbol and everything, and a new website that's more about the project and so on. And the park itself is going to be really cool. These are these renderings. It's kind of amazing, actually, with these walkways and like kayaking and things. I mean, it's really crazy. And our signs are now going to be in the park because we started off doing that vinyl sign, and then we turned it into a website, and then we turned it into a sign, and now we find ourselves doing all the signage for Brooklyn Bridge Park, which we won't be done with until 2013 at this point. So we're doing these directional signs, and everything is kind of based on the industrial heritage of the site. So these are going to be just stenciled on the ground the way those kind of things are. These are rule signs and things like that. And then a really fun part is that all the buildings that were on site before had this old signage that was there. So before everything was demolished, we went and did a survey and salvaged all the signage. And so now all of these things like this are going to be now reinstalled as new signs in the park. Obviously the buildings won't be there, but we're using the letters in other ways. The funniest part is that Pier 6 is opening, this is Pier 3, Pier 6 is opening this summer, and there was never a 6 in the park before. So we had to do this thing where we were analyzing the old type and made, like, what would the engineer who drew this type in the 50s have done if he was going to draw a 6? So we ended up drawing a 6. Anyway, so the first part of the park, Pier 1, actually opened just a few weeks ago. It's very cool. You should go. It's very kind of barren at this point now because it's just all growing in. When I was there with Michael van Valkenburg, who's the landscape architect that designed the park, he was pointing out some of these trees to me that look kind of like, sidewalk trees around. And he said, yeah, it's going to be cool. In a little while, these trees will be, bigger and they'll have some weight to them, and then there'll be some shade in this part of the park. And I said, oh, that's great. How long is a little while? He says, yeah, about 40 years. And as it turns out, these are redwoods. And in 100 years, there'll be a redwood forest here. Of course, that none of us will see. But you can go see our signs. Those actually might not be the redwoods, but there are redwoods. And now, of course, we're making the signs for the park, so we have a few in there now. And all this happened because they wanted a crappy vinyl sign a while ago. And it's been a really interesting project for us, again, to try to make these things that have these details that you wouldn't really think about or notice, but hopefully, 20 years the signs will still be there. And, or maybe we'll still be working on them, actually. Anyway, Thanks.